Ladies and gentlemen, this is the day. We got the winners of Kansas City Royals, we got the Chiefs, and we got you guys in Ferguson, USA Hot Talk Radio, and we just had what they tell me is a very successful Zoom show, and now we're connecting up with the young lady from KCK, the young lady who's a straight-A student at UMKC, a young lady that is taking radio production at UMKC. But now we're going to dig into ancestry and the family. And today's topic is Salas and Wells connection. So, Chayanne, you know something about it. Let's discuss what you do know, what you found out about the Salases, and hopefully the other people join us.
Hello, nice to talk to everyone. And yes, I do know some about the Salases because they're like a family of a family to me. Because my family is part of the Wells family. And one of the Salases married a Wells, and there's been a lot of family reunions between both the families. And so the main person, who started the Salas family, right, the common ancestor name was Thomas Salas, right? And he was born January 1845 in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. and he was married to a woman named Martha. Are those your grandparents, great grandparents?
Yes.
Okay. And may I ask who your grandparent was? Who was their child? That was your grandparent.
Well, my grandpa, excuse me, was Annie Salas Bridges, and she is of 14 children. She was born in 1882, and they moved from Mississippi into the Indian Territory, which is now the state of Oklahoma. And their family, they really multiplied quickly. In other words, they couldn't get lonely because they had too many siblings among them. And Annie Salas, and that's the one that her sister, Emma Salas, was Eliza Clement King's grandmother. And with Eliza King, her father was Russell Clement. And that's what it started. But we go back to the Salases, where Mr. Wells married Luella Salas, which I don't know, was she the firstborn for the Salases, Cheyenne?
Oh, no, she was not. She, I believe, would be the 5th child.
Okay, well, kind of go through the Salas, and I'll work with you on that.
Okay,
Who were the siblings?
So the oldest one was Horace, or
Okay,
Harris.
right, yeah, okay.
The name changes. There was one named Mary.
Okay.
Henry.
Okay.
Willie.
Okay.
Columbus.
Yes.
Luella.
Oh, I thought she was up further than that. Okay.
And Margaret, Emma, Annie, Caledonia.
Yeah, and you got Betty too, don't you?
Yeah, she is down the list, I think.
Well, see, the Salases, they kind of hung in triplets. You had Emma, Betty, and Annie. And they kind of hung together, ran together. What was the correct terminology back then was. And this is a family that really, through the Wells and the Salases, they did a lot of repeating of names, passing on to the different families.
Oh, absolutely. Because there's a bunch of Thomases within the family, the Salas family. And the name just keeps repeating and repeating throughout the decades. And it's amazing how that name just continues on. And talking about the Wells family, Luella Salas married someone named Willis Wells. And they had, I believe, 7 children, according to the census. And what was very interesting about that is that Willis Wells was my great-great-grandmother's brother, okay? And so I know that the Wells is an extremely big family because on my side alone, there's about 500 descendants from my great-great-grandmother, whose name was Jeanette.
Oh, Eliza, they're gonna call you. We on this.
And yeah, it's a really big family. And what is amazing is that these people survived from really intense, let me see, the Thomas Salas and Martha Salas were both born, I believe, in slavery, which I don't believe Kosciuszko was a place, but it was just called Alta County at this point. and the Wells lived there as well. And what I found was interesting about Thomas Salas was that it's unsure who his biological father was, right? From based off the census, he knew who he was, but it's not on any of the records.
Chayanne, this is Alphonse. How you doing?
Good.
To me, okay, you said they had 500 offspring in the family?
Yes.
Wow. That was
Yeah.
They all in Mississippi, they move around different places.
Oh, well, this side of the family moved to Oklahoma as well, but they moved earlier, like in the 1800s, because on my family side, they were trying to get to California to escape, like, really brutal oppression that was going on in Mississippi at that time. Because if you look at the newspaper archives, right, that's based on that area, you can read stories about people who was running away from the plantations, okay? And they have stories about it was terrible. And
did they have any name of the plantation they were running away from?
No, they did not have the names of the plantations. They never had the names on any of the records, right? But they had who the slave owners were.
Okay.
And so the slave owner for the Wells family, he didn't even use his full name. It was just E.N. Wells, and he was a judge. And then, all the Wells from that, from Kosciuszko, came from that man plantation.
Well, but he was a native slave owner, evidently.
And so it said on the 1860s census, he had about 20,000 of personal value, okay? $20,000, and that's a lot, especially with inflation.
Historically speaking, most of the slaves down there, okay, when people, wherever they went to court or wherever the people who became slaves, they were hired out, to work on different people's plantations. So and the sheriff is the one that assigned them, okay, to the plantations, for them to work out what they owed. And I guess with this gentleman being a judge, okay, he had first dibs on everybody else for all the slaves, that whole county, evidently.
And because he was a judge, basically, he was wealthy, okay?
Yeah, very wealthy.
Very wealthy.
20 slaves, that's why you get $20,000. That's a lot of money back in those days.
Oh, yes. With inflation, that's easily over 100,000 at this point.
Real easily, yeah. And in those days, they have not spending money on in those days.
Absolutely. And so, for the Salas part, there wasn't a really clear explanation about who was the slave owner, since the whole family owned slaves. The white Salas part owned slaves, okay? And so, it's just a horrific history when you start looking through these slave records, right, and what these people went through.
Yeah. And I could imagine that he must have a hell of a plantation to have that many slaves, you know what I'm saying?
And so, and just in this, and it's gone.
Shane, just curious. If he had them many slaves, he must have had a lot of cotton, a lot of corn, or whatever to get for them to do down there, for him to make money off, not just off the value of the slaves, but of the crops that he raised.
Yes, absolutely. And so, it's just, horrific to think about. These people were just born to work.
Yeah.
They were forced to work for someone else's plantation.
Yeah, and getting none of the money maybe they get chance to spend.
Yes, and what's crazy about some of these areas in Mississippi, right? these plantations still kind of exist. They're still standing up to this day.
Oh, yeah, also Louisiana too, yeah.
Yeah, throughout the South, you can, more than likely, some of where your ancestors were living at, their plantation could still be existing where they worked at. And it's not that many generations ago, because you still hear like older people talk about, oh, I used to visit the plantation, or I was born on one, and these people aren't that old.
No. I was born on one myself, not in my father's side of the family. I had no choice, because I lived in Vicksburg, Mississippi at the time, and there were no hospitals for blacks to be born in. So we had no choice but to go back to the plantation and to be born. And that's where the midwives were.
And so do you remember growing up there?
Yes, I do. In fact, I was born where I was born, it was in Delta, Louisiana, right across the road from Vicksburg. But once I was weaned, I went back to Vicksburg, Mississippi, where I remained until I was 16. But I was visiting every summer. I was visiting my grandparents on my mother's side, who were, in Vicksburg over there. And you already know my family in those days grew up, with this very successful black female in history, one of the first black millionaires. What's her name?
Madam C.J. Walker?
Yeah, Madam C.J. Walker, yes, okay. And so my family, but I was born over there, and today that plantation still exists where I was born at. In Delta, Louisiana, yeah. I was driving through there, going to Louisiana, going down to Alexandria and down to New Orleans, and, down there. And it's right there, when you go there, the plantation, I think at the time, one thing I just was surprised, see was still a plantation.
Wow. And like the thing is, this is just a point to say, like, this stuff wasn't that long ago.
No. But one thing down in Michigan now, you have more blacks who actually own land down there now, and a lot of black, cities and towns there, that the blacks are also holding elective offices also in a lot of towns in Mississippi also.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's good to hear.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, a lot of black people, you see in the South now, are doing better than people in New York in some cases.
Because land is literally gold at this point.
Right, and so they steal a lot on the farms, and that they pass on to their families and stuff, and in a lot of cases, as you know, but how you see it, we both found out a lot of those people's land was tricked away from them.
Oh, yes.
During the years.
Because if you look at how a lot of people lost their land, right, some of these people could not read because they were never taught or given the opportunity to be able to read. And so they basically, how some people lost their land was these people came in, told them a lie, and said, hey, if you sign this, we'll give you this, right? But they couldn't read that the contract was actually just stealing their land and selling their mineral rights and all that stuff.
Yeah, we said mineral rights, we talking about oil, which is gold.
And so you have it was pretty common for people to just lose their land, especially back in the day, because they just did not know what they were signing. They used all this business terms, right? Which the average person back then did not know what that meant.
Well, Chayanne, even in these times today, a lot of black people now are not aware of all the tricks that people are playing now. A lot of people are using their land and stuff now to foreclosure as the people have had homes for a long time. The families are losing them because the kid may have decided, take a loan out and then tell the parents about the loan was taken out. And the parents, they homestead, so to speak. So there's still tricks out there on how to trick people out their land.
Yeah, and And it's still going on even to this day. And it's really saddening to me. Because these people had this land for who knows how long. They worked on it. They worked to get it. It's just gone. It's in, like, barely seconds. You can't really get it back.
No, nobody gets the land back because there's a clause someplace down there they got on there to make sure that you can't get it back.
I did not know that.
Now, most of the laws, keep in mind the laws in our country were never written by black folks, colored or black, what you want to call it. We wrote very few laws, they were.
Oh, no, yeah, because some of these places, they never really got rid of these laws, right? Which, like, definitely these laws are racist because they was made in, some of them were made during the slavery era. And they still use these laws to justify and not update some of this stuff. It's quite scary because what if, like, they pull up a law saying, from the 1880s, that's super racist, right? It's not good.
Well, and in most cases that you are here in court, the person at the court, the person in charge of the records is the person that actually controls what decisions are being made, because they can either go back so long and find what record they want to find, or substitute records they want to substitute, because again, they have the information and opportunity to control. Right now, they control the files that's out there that's being utilized. Yeah.
I did not know that either.
Most cases, I know here in St. Louis, I work very closely with our recorder deeds, and a lot of the old records that went way back, and I always love history, that went back in St. Louis. Then the thing was, a lot of what they've been called for slave state, which Brazil was a slave state in those days, and so St. Louis and Kansas City was with the metropolis cities. They were working in rivers and stuff. And that's what most black folks were able to grow up, and control. I think like in Kansas City, I think the population is mostly black there, but black still have control of the council there. And again, the historical black in those days, like in the 80s, you're talking about, they didn't have access to law advice or stuff, what to do and what not to do. And we kind of spoiled now that anybody had access to information all the time.
Yeah. And that's what's really good with the internet, right? And you have knowledge at your fingertips. If you really need to look something up, right? Or you can go to your local library and look up books. But, both is super helpful. Because before I even go to the library, I look at they have what I really need on my cell phone.
On our cell phones, we have all the libraries, Library of Congress is on your telephone, all the libraries around the world on your telephone. The encyclopedias used to be something everybody took pride. I got some encyclopedias. But nowadays, people don't brag about having encyclopedias no more now. And besides encyclopedias, all change every year. Okay, so you buy new thing every year. But right now, our phones update us every year. They update us all during the year when the laws change.
Wow. You know what's interesting, what you just brought up? You said people used to, brag about having encyclopedias. Wow, I can't imagine. I don't even remember the last time I bought one.
Oh, no, I can't even. I was a person that loved the library, and the people, like us as in Richardson, people, who thought they had money, we got encyclopedias. Oh, yay.
That's amazing. And, it just takes a couple generations to see, the huge shift in what's considered the new it thing was considered to brag about. Because people now brag about the new phones they have. But I just find it so funny that people used to be like, oh, look, I got this encyclopedia.
They did. As a matter of fact, they were in fact very proud of it. You know, I was listening to a program today. United States Congressman Mr. Hubbard was on shopping, and he was talking about the infrastructure bill that just got passed, and he was talking about broadband, and he was comparing infrastructure that the broadband nowadays is was like electricity was in the old days. That's how important that people down had information power, and that's why so many people, find out, there's more discussion now. People find out things that like the critical race theory. We discussed that in my program. The white folks don't want black folks to know the history about how they treat us.
Because, I really enjoy that I can get all different types of history because I learn every single day. This happened?
Right.
And, it's not being taught, even though some of this stuff only happened, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing.
Well, being a genealogist as you are, you also create another position for us in history that's been what we call historian. Because, that's, if you compare the two, you're doing the same thing. So people come to you, we come to you for now, because like MC comes to you now for history. Which is we could be stacked all day, they call you a historian.
Oh, yes, absolutely, because all these documents I go through are historical. And they are very important, and I believe people need to know where they came from, who their parents, their grandparents, even how they even got to where they're at right now. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the reason that where you are right now is probably because what your parents did, what your grandparents did, how they got here. And literally, I would not exist without my grandparents.
Well, in your case, on your mother and your father's side, especially your father's side, where his heritage, qualifies you okay for right up to India. But again, that's because the records were there for you to go look them up, okay, and see that you qualify.
Oh, yes, and since I am a citizen of Cherokee Nation currently, and I don't think a lot of people realize, but Cherokee people have one of the most detailed records. They kept records of literally everyone. And
they kept the records of that. Anybody didn't do that.
Yeah, and so you have the what they call the 5 civilized tribes, right? Which they are Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, right? And they all kept really great records of who their people were. Even if someone didn't make it, right? They will bring them up in the story. Oh yeah, I'm related to blah blah, and they pass away during the Trail of Tears. They keep those records.
Yeah.
And it's really detailed.
That's commendable. I mean, most of the things in history is, and most times people go around that you have to write down the notes or write down the history.
And see, for African Americans, right, a lot of our records do stop in the 1870s, 1860s, because, slavery. They didn't keep any records of...
Another thing saying that, unfortunately for blacks, a lot of inventions are things that we created, okay, the white man got credit for, mainly because we didn't know how to write it down. We would tell him about what we just did. And then he would write it down, you know what I mean? And I know one of the things that I have found out, a lot of people would take a person's idea, and when they try to implement it, it doesn't go to where they planned it, okay? But you can't take somebody else does, okay, and make it work. But again, okay, who knew that at the time? You know, it didn't go right. That's what it is.
But yeah, because a lot of records, even though there's like some of them have been burned, right? But there's a bunch of records that survived, and one of the main records that I believe is very important is the census. Okay, it's one of the most important records for genealogy. Because it tells you what they did, who they were, where they lived, like where they used to live. And occasionally you find out, like, really history that wouldn't be passed down at all.
You know, in 1790 when we did the first census, and this is what actually came from Africa, that goes all the way back, to when Christ was born. That he had to go back, when his father Joseph was born there to be part of a census. I mean, so there's been something that's been artistic, okay, for so many years, how to actually do the census and put down the basic information, which is your mother and your father. And the current kids. I mean, so there's been artistic how to use it, okay, but most blacks were not introduced to how to do that until matter of fact, most days, people in the South, their Bibles were how they get their history.
Oh yeah, but for the census, right? They just kind of went around. Even you didn't have to read or write, or even speak English in some cases to get your records put on the census. Because the good thing about the census is that it had all different races on there, even though, like, some records would just leave, black people off because they weren't considered human, okay? It was only till, like, the 1870s where all black people, well, I say most black people who took the census, was put on the census for the first time as fully recognized human beings, because they didn't consider slaves. They considered them like 2/5.
No, they were property.
3/5, that's it.
No, slaves were property, as you said.
Yeah, property. And it is just really interesting to see the census, right? Because let me give you an example real quick. So, going back to the Salas family, and I guess the common ancestor name was Thomas Salas. And so on his census, he always lists his parents from being his mother being from Virginia, right? And his father being from Mississippi, which I found was very interesting, right? But if you didn't look closely at the census, right, you would assume that Thomas Salas' parents would be someone named Maria and Albert, because they share the same last name. But on the census, they are living together, right? But Albert always claimed that he was from the Carolinas. And so I looked through a lot of people's family trees, right? And they always list that Thomas Salas' father's name was Albert. But I don't think that's correct at all, because the census, both their census don't add up.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Okay? What has been the basic question that all the teachers has been asked all the time over the years? I know they added some more questions again. What has been the probably 4 or 5 basic questions that people ask that the census require when
They ask you your name, how old you think you are, your birthday, when you were born, where your house is. I think in the 1870s they start adding really race, because if you were white, they just left it blank. They ask what your gender is, and if you were a male citizen. And so after, like, the 1880s, it started evolving, right? And it started asking where your parents were born, if you can write, and what your occupation was.
Okay. That's a big change right there.
And then in the 1900s, they started asking what year you were married, how long you've been married, what's your marriage status.
But I know this year they tried to add some language to the census. Okay, there was a rule out, and they want to ask you about you know immigrant or not, and that was kind of kicked off. And it's kind of really on, but this year we'll go down in history as being a shorter year because really it was a month short of collecting information.
Oh yeah, that definitely affected the numbers, because some people probably thought they had a month to finish it. Okay,
Yeah.
and that messes up funding. That affects a lot of things within your community.
Let me ask this, if I could. We're going back to Lou Ellis' grandson that went up. He's now at Howard University. What were you telling me about him?
Oh, I think that's her great grandson.
Okay.
And his name is Milbert Brown. And Dr. Milbert O. Brown. He's a journalist, just as I am. He used to travel across the world. He covered South Africa's first free election. He was selected as part of the UN committee to report on Liberia's election. He also, let me see what else he did. He won, how do you pronounce this?
Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, prize in journalism.
Writing for people. And that comes from the paper here in St. Louis, where they want to turn the folks to Spanish. It was a paper that was created by them.
Let me ask, if I could, MC Richardson, let me ask either one of you, and we run into this problem all the time, that our relatives, the ones we think are our relatives, are really hesitant or don't want to talk and share anything. And they will cop out in a minute, in my terminology. And how are we going to learn if we don't have somebody to talk to us? And if we're not able to, a lot of them say you can't read and write, but the ones who can read and write, they don't share that information. And they say education begins at home. But nowadays, people used to have the teachers to educate them. That way they got away from them after the summer. They would go to school in the fall, like we got going now. But the parents was happy to get away, get them out of their so-called air. So, but let me ask either one of you, why is it that we are so hesitant? You know, that they didn't want, we'll say, black folks to read or write. And a lot of us really absorb that. And then a lot of us really don't like to share information, or maybe they don't know how to share information. And the same way with the Indians, y'all call them Native American, I call them American Indians, that they have to go to boarding school because they didn't want them to read or write. So what kind of answer, how can we alleviate that in order to do this research, and it'll work for all people to know where they come from, what womb they came out of, and how this can make us a better place to live and learn our ancestry?
Well, I really suggest reaching out to family members. Like, reaching out to family members that you normally would not talk about, or ask someone like, hey, with some cousins that I don't know about. Because for the first time, when I really started getting into my genealogy and finding out exactly who I was, it was from the records, but what really helped me was talking to family members, because they had photos, and those photos did not pass down to me or my mother or any of her siblings. And it was like, wow. When I started talking to them, they didn't think anyone else would want to see that. And so I just think it's very important to really talk to your family. Like, if you're comfortable with it, talk to, like, some family members. It doesn't matter if they're close or distant. They might have some information about an ancestor that would have just never got passed down at all.
Well, one thing you mentioned there earlier on about a lot of early on Indians and stuff, especially the information that they were out to boarding school. Well, those were normally the people who led the tribes, and they put their kids in schools away from their families. They were separated. And one of the things that like you said earlier on, that most times, most black, and people on plantations and stuff, they just never gave in their thought. They know how to write stuff down, and then most times it was like word of mouth. And if you had somebody in the family who could write it in your Bible for you, or could tell you what was going on, or they would be one happy to share with you, but they didn't know what to share. And that was one of the things. Okay, myself, I was fortunate enough as I was raised. I was taught how to write. I had a typewriter. My family, everything that we read my Bible all the time, and just reading documentation. And I passed that on to my 3 daughters, and they passed on to their kids also. So around us, okay, we all love to read, and I always let mother do research.
Okay, if you just tune in, you listen to Guess Who's Coming to Kansas City, and we are quarter till our closing time. But let me ask you, in the boarding school, they got the Heart of America Indian Center over on West 39th. And people learn, and most of the people who went to boarding schools, why is it they have the interracial marriages? Because the white always married one of the Indians who was probably part of that boarding school to one of the instructors. So they had a lot of interracial marriage. They had one in the South where the fur trappers, they would marry the Indian, and this is what they, probably you can look this up, Chayanne, that they would stay married to them 5 years, and they would kill them in order to get their land. Are you cognizant of that?
Oh, yeah. So for the boarding schools, right, a lot of those people were they were forced to send their kids to those boarding schools in the first place.
They had money and land.
Yeah, so they were forced because basically the thing was, their motto was kill the Indian, save the man. I'm pretty sure. So they were trying to eliminate any type of cultural things that made them Native American, okay? And so they would usually just take their kids because with that as well, some people just did not survive those boarding schools. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of that, but recently they're just finding all the mass graves in these boarding schools of Native American children. And I think that's about 10,000.
What about the Europeans will say on elimination? That's what Andrew Jackson did. I think it was 1830, I think, where he eliminated the Native American. Now, go ahead.
So in 1838, he forced them off their land, right? Because they found it was good farming land, and so they forced them to walk what is now known as the Trail of Tears. And all my family on my dad's side had to walk that, whether they were Native American or the slaves of the Native Americans that they had. And so, what was interesting, you brought up that a lot of them would eventually marry and have interracial marriages, right? Well, what happened with that was, I think it might have been common for them to marry them because the Native Americans got these things called land allotments, which was land that they were given because, you know, the government stole their land. And so people would either marry them, right, just take it from them, and like usually they didn't even have to kill them to take the land. It was just like, okay, you sign this, and you get the land just becomes automatically the other person's land. And go on.
I'm thinking about that. If probably have to educate your kids in return and get you their land. And they're not doing any better, okay? They got you got their land.
Yeah, basically. Or like a common thing was they would come up to a person after one of their relatives died and said, "Oh, sign this so you can pay for the funeral."
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't know, because also a lot of these people were educated, but they didn't speak, you know. Some of them didn't speak English. They spoke their other language. For my family, I believe, like, I think my great-grandmother, she grew up in a household that spoke Cherokee, right? But I guess when Oklahoma became a state, they weren't allowed to speak that language anymore.
Oh, yes. Well, what they did when they went off to college, they couldn't speak their languages. I mean, there was one way, it was about 8 years ago, when they took the chief's kids, okay, when they took their land from them, all right, they were sending the kids off to college someplace. And the kids were, not allowed to speak the language, okay, from which they came from. And hence, that's why a lot of times in history you find out the Indians started using smoke signals and drum beats as a way to communicate. They were forbidden, to speak in the language that they grew up with.
Yeah, because in these boarding schools, right, they want to let you speak their language. They removed any type of thing that was culturally significant to these people. Like, they would cut their hair, force them to wear American-sized uniforms, right? And I believe it was these boarding schools were part of these, like, I don't know, I forgot what it was. Some of these were like missionary schools too. And so they believed that these Native American people, their culture was part of the devil stuff. Even like them having long hair, all that stuff. And so they really attempted to wipe out or assimilate, or what they call civilize, these people.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most craziest things about life, okay, in our country, as we know it, and that's how even today, as you look about how our young people now are being like you said, Black history not being taught right now. Okay.
No, and I just find that absolutely crazy how they're attempting to remove history that is a part of American history. If you're going to teach American history, you got to teach the good and the bad. You can't just leave out.
No, there's no bad. As a matter of fact, one of the things, Chayanne, the things about most of the Hollywood movies, okay, will be made, and they have white people on the back. The history is made by a black person, okay, but like still the movies and stuff, they had to show, okay, there was a white person, like a John Wayne, somebody else, okay, being the person out in the desert, fighting 1,000 Indians all by himself. Like, come on, he's real.
Can I jump in? This is Ruby. How you doing, Chayanne?
Hi, how's it going?
It's going fine. So to MC's question, he's like, why we really don't know our history. Part of that, and why relatives don't pass it down, I think part of it is because of for one, it was a painful past, that they didn't want to discuss, and it could be also, too, a shameful past. And to your point about the education, first of all, they didn't want us to read, and I hate the fact that they wanted everybody to assimilate because either they didn't understand or they didn't want to understand, not to mention the fact that they want to still be superior. And two, as far as them trying to do this, what is it called, the race theory, they don't want us to teach that. Well, you know what, as you say, that is a part of American history, and it needs to be taught, and I think that we need to rise up against that. I don't just let them have their say, that we all need to come out at some point, you know, and being black and part Indian too, you know, I can relate to everything that you're saying, you know, and what really hurts me a lot is the Trail of Tears, you know, when they made them walk. And, you know, then when they got to, I think it was Oklahoma, that they wanted, once they found out that there was oil on that land, they wanted to try to displace them yet again. So I think that we need to talk to our children, you know, not necessarily wait for them to teach, because it should have been taught. You know, when I was in school, it was only like there were about 4 or 5 people that really did anything. They were always talking about Harriet Tubman, and then later on there was Martin Luther King, and who is it, Ben Carver, George Washington Carver. And it's we have way more people that are instrumental in things that we have, and also the things that we invented that the white man took credit for, even though it was not their invention.
Yeah, as you were saying with,
Go ahead.
Today, we did a show today on critical race theory on our program today, and we have a minister here in St. Louis, and he's working right now to kind of, you know, address, you know, the critical race theory that he should not want to be taught. And he created a program that has 4 steps to it. They're going to start working with here on how we can work about restoring our history, make sure it's being told.
but like for critical race theory, that's only taught in college classes, which is interesting, right? I'm pretty certain.
Right.
No, right now, all states, right, most states are fighting right now for not to be taught in public schools.
Oh no, but like that's a funny thing. It's like a college level theory, but they're trying to remove all different types of like American history, right? Where I know in some textbooks they talk about slavery being like, oh, you know, the black people came over here willingly to help the country. It's the craziest thing. And they said, yeah, I remember seeing a textbook like that growing up, actually.
Well, here's the thing. I went out and I did some research. So California actually teaches history, you know, the race history and everything. And if you look at a textbook in California and you look at the textbook in Texas, they're all blank pages. And so we need to recognize that. Then I remember a few years ago, a teacher, she did all of her research using Wikipedia, mind you, and we all know that that's not a primary source. And I'm not sure what happened with that, but I think that, you know, it should be taught in elementary school, and then, you know, on up to not necessarily the critical race theory, but just the history in general. I know it's nasty and I know it's ugly, but it needs to be known. And they're trying to whitewash it.
Ignoring it at this point because it happened. It already happened. It is crazy how they try to erase it. And as you were bringing up, I think you talked about how some of these older people did not want to talk about their history because of shame.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or the pain.
Or
the pain. That it's a painful memory.
Absolutely, because I talked to a bunch of older people, right? And it's like, let me tell you a story since you're, like, basically they say, you're grown, right, finally.
Mm-hmm.
These older people's like, oh, you got to get out of grown people's business, right?
Right.
But some of this stuff definitely needs to be passed down. I want to know how your childhood was. I want to know what y'all lived through.
Mm-hmm.
But these people it's a painful memory to the point where they can't talk about it.
You know, once again, and I appreciate you and Chayanne, y'all did a beautiful job and a very thorough job, but like always, it's that time to go. And just want to tell you, in the month of September, we have shows booked, except for next Saturday, and I got a good idea for a show then. But on the 3rd of April, the 24th of April, then we will have something on what happened in Ketcher, Arkansas. And then we have one Chayanne got with her Uncle Carl, and they're telling you about redlining district and the history of old Kansas City, including the tunnels underneath where we always used to think that only occurred in North Kansas City, or Kansas City North. So those are things on, that's the 25th of September. But be sure to tune in. What do you have going next 2 or 3 weeks?
Well, next week we're doing a show with one of our gentlemen by the name of Iceberg, who was one of our people at our station early on, and he's a pioneer, and there was a disc jockey that goes way back in the days, and that's going to be kind of a history about the music culture here in St. Louis, which is very, very, very famous around the world.
I thought you were going to say Iceberg Slim.
I thought I might say something.
Chayanne, you don't know what he's talking about, do you? Chayanne, he was a pimp. But ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in, and tune in each and every week, and we'll have no nonsense programming for you. And tell your friends, get their list on. What should they put their list on, Mr. Folks?
Well, they can go to FergusonUSAHotTalkRadio.com, go to our podcast library, get a couple of our shows, or they can get a hold of Scott, our engineer and general manager, about putting the information on the station. Scott, how does that work?
That works for me. What about you, Chayanne?
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, that's okay. Well, you kind of hesitant. You can talk. It's all right. We know you're just 21, but it's okay.
It's all good here.
Well, thank you very much for turning on and tuning in. And like I always say, we're out of here.
Well, just keep me safe.
Bye.